One Deathworlder entered the arena. Moments later, the galaxy's apex predator was running. The gate behind me had already sealed. I could feel the vibration of 90,000 bodies in the stands even through the soles of my boots. The roar was not directed at me, it was directed at the other gate, the one directly across the arena floor, where something enormous was pressing its weight against the metal and making the whole structure groan. My name is Claire Okafor. I am a sergeant in the 1st Expeditionary Diplomatic Guard, and 6 weeks ago my commanding officer looked me in the eye and asked me if I was afraid of dying. I told him no. He said that was probably a problem, but he signed the form anyway. The arena was 1 kilometer across, a perfect sphere of pale stone with shallow trenches cut into the sand and clusters of dark rock rising in irregular formations across the floor. The architects had designed it to give prey somewhere to hide. I had spent 2 days walking a scale model of it. I was not planning to hide. Seth in 7 Voices was in my earpiece. He was my diplomatic liaison, a nervous 4-armed clerk who had spent the last 3 days trying to talk me out of this in every language he knew. His voice was a whisper now, barely audible over the crowd. Claire, the Vorkai has killed 11 sentients in this arena. 11. The last one lasted 22 seconds. You are allowed to forfeit. No one will think less of humanity. We are a young species in the compact. There is no shame in... Seth, I said quietly. Yes? I need you to be quiet now. He went quiet. The other gate exploded open. It did not open the way a door opens. It blew back on its hinges like something had thrown it, and the thing that came through moved so fast my brain spent a full second refusing to process it. 7 limbs. 3 meters at the shoulder. Its flanks were cycling through sheets of blue and violet bioluminescence, patterns rippling down its body in waves, and its 4 lower limbs hit the sand with a sound like a small building collapsing. 7 prehensile upper limbs fanned out, and it opened its jaw wide enough to swallow a car door. The crowd went absolutely feral. The Vorkai stood in the center of its entry point and looked at me. I have been looked at by a lot of things. I have been looked at by people who wanted me dead. This was different. This was the look of something deciding that I was not a threat, but a resource. Something to be processed. Its scent marked the sand in a long drag of its rear limb. Eyes locked on me the entire time. And that was a dominant signal I had read about in the xenobiology files. It was telling every other creature in this arena that I already belonged to it. I rolled my shoulders and walked forward. Not fast, not slow. The way you walk when you are going somewhere you need to be. The crowd noise changed. Not louder, not quieter. Just different. A new frequency entered it, something uncertain, and I felt it more than I heard it. The Vorkai's bioluminescent patterns shifted. I had read about that too. When the display cycles irregularly, flickering between colors instead of flowing in smooth waves, it means threat confusion. The creature is running a reassessment. Nothing in its evolutionary history has walked toward it after seeing what it is. It charged anyway. 7 limbs moving in perfect mechanical sequence. It came across the arena floor at a speed that should not have been possible for something that large, and the sound of it was enormous, a rolling concussion of mass and velocity, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. I ran toward it. Not because I am fearless. I am not fearless. My hands were shaking and my heart was doing something my medic would have called alarming. But I had read the report. I had read it 4 times. The Vorkai's ambush reflex, the neural circuit that governs its kill response, is calibrated entirely for fleeing prey. The reflex fires on a moving away target. A target moving toward the Vorkai does not match the trigger pattern. For approximately 0.8 seconds, the predator experiences something its biology has never needed a name for. It hesitates. I had practiced using 0.8 seconds for 6 weeks straight. What I did in those seconds was not clean or impressive. It was fast and deliberate, and it hurt the Vorkai in a way that nothing had hurt it before, because nothing had ever been in a position to. I used the inside of its own geometry against it. I knew where the joints were. I knew where the nerve clusters sat, mapped out in a university xenobiology paper from compact archives that had been filed under routine fauna survey reports and apparently never read by anyone who thought it might be useful in a fight. The Vorkai recoiled. The sound it made was not a roar. It was something higher, more confused. The sound of a system receiving an input it does not have a processing pathway for. The arena went silent. Not quieter. Silent. 90,000 beings and not one of them making a sound. I stepped back to give myself distance and I breathed, and I catalogued my damage while I watched the Vorkai shake its head and reset. 2 lacerations on my left forearm from a reflex swipe I had not fully avoided. Bruised ribs where a secondary limb had clipped me on the way past. Nothing structural. Nothing that changed what came next. The Vorkai turned back to face me. Its bioluminescence had gone erratic. Patches of it were dark entirely, and the Compact's xenobiology files had a note about that too. Localized bioluminescence shutdown under stress indicates elevated cortisol analog hormones. The creature was not calm. It was running something closer to what I would call rattled. It began to circle me. I let it circle. I turned with it, keeping my eyes on its shoulder joints, not its face. Its face was designed to draw attention. The shoulders told you where it was actually going. It feinted left. I did not move. It feinted left again, faster, and I still did not move, and I watched its weight distribution shift in the half-second before it committed, and I was already out of the line by the time it lunged. Not by much. Enough. It hit a rock outcropping behind me with enough force to crack the stone, and I used the 2 seconds it spent recovering to put distance between us and reposition near the shallow trench to my right. The crowd was still silent. I remember thinking that was the strangest part. 90,000 beings watching something they did not have a category for. The Vorkai oriented on me. Its heat-sensing pits, located in a band around its upper jaw, gave it a roughly 270-degree field of thermal detection. The blind spot was a 90-degree cone directly behind and above its head. I had memorized the geometry. Every time I moved in arcs that forced it to turn, that put me briefly in the edge of that cone, that made its tracking slightly less certain than it should have been. It was working harder than it had ever worked in this arena. I could see it in the way it moved. The Vorkai was built for a specific kind of hunt. Short burst, overwhelming force, immediate kill. It was not built for this. It was not built for a target that studied it, that anticipated it, that kept forcing it to work in ways its muscles and its instincts, and its entire evolutionary heritage had not prepared it for. It charged again, and this time I moved early and fast toward the rock formation on my left, and I used the terrain the way I had rehearsed, and I forced it to check its own speed to avoid the rocks, and in the moment it checked I was already somewhere else, already watching its rear left limb favor slightly on the landing. Old injury. Visible in the gait analysis I had done from arena footage of its previous 11 kills. I moved to its left. Every time. Relentlessly. Every repositioning put me on its weaker side. Put it working that compromised limb harder than it wanted to. It was not dramatic. It did not look like a fight. It looked like something deeply strange was happening in the sand of that arena, something the crowd had no vocabulary for. The Vorkai's bioluminescence was almost entirely dark now. I have told this next part to a lot of people, and they always want it to be more than it was. They want a final clash, a decisive moment, something that looks like a victory. That is not what happened. What happened was that the Vorkai stopped. It stopped in the middle of a repositioning move, all 7 limbs planted, and it looked at me, and something shifted in it. Not in its posture, not in its display, somewhere underneath. I cannot tell you exactly what it felt, because I am not a Vorkai, and the xenobiology files are silent on the inner experience of their subjects. But the files did contain one behavioral note that I had underlined. When a Vorkai encounters a predator larger and more dangerous than itself, it goes dark. Full bioluminescence shutdown. And it runs. Every light on its body went out. And then it ran. Not toward me. Away. Back across the arena floor, all 7 limbs moving in a scrambling, graceless terror that looked nothing like the way it had entered. Back toward its own gate. Hitting the sealed metal with enough force to buckle it. Pushing through the gap. Gone. I stood in the center of the arena. I was bleeding from 2 places. My ribs hurt when I breathed. The sand around me was torn up from the Vorkai's movements, and there was a cracked rock outcropping behind me, and I was standing in the middle of it all, and the arena was still completely silent. It stayed silent for a very long time. Then Seth in 7 voices spoke in my ear, and his voice was different from anything I had heard from him in 3 days of trying to reason me out of this moment. It was quiet and slow and careful, the way you speak when you are trying to understand something that has just rearranged your understanding of the universe. "Claire," he said, "what are you?" I thought about that question. I thought about Earth. I thought about what Earth is, when you look at it from outside. Class 2 biosystem. Moderately dangerous. Mostly water. Home to a soft-bodied, thin-skinned, slow-healing, non-venomous, unarmored species with no natural weapons to speak of, who were prey for most of their evolutionary history, who were chased and caught and eaten for 200,000 years by things faster and stronger and more naturally equipped than they were. And who spent every one of those years watching, learning, taking notes in the dark, building mental maps of the things that hunted them, memorizing patterns, sharing information across generations, figuring out how to use terrain and timing and tools to bridge every gap that biology had left open. Not because they were brave, because they were afraid, and they were smart, and they needed to survive. And this is what survival looked like when your body could not do the work alone. The compact cataloged us as prey adjacent. They looked at what we lacked and wrote a report about our limitations. They did not ask what a prey-adjacent species becomes after 200,000 years of needing to be smarter than the thing trying to eat it. I pressed the earpiece. "I'm from Earth," I said. "Class 2 biosystem." Seth did not respond. Above me, the crowd was beginning to find its voice again. Not a roar this time. Something slower, building from scattered points across the stands. A sound I had no easy comparison for. The announcer's broadcast was playing on a delay loop through the speaker systems embedded in the arena walls, still cycling through the introduction it had given before the gates opened. And as I walked back toward my tunnel, the words followed me across the sand. "The soft one wins." The gate opened and I walked through it, and it sealed behind me. And I stood in the dark of the staging tunnel and let my hands shake the way they had been wanting to shake since the moment I stepped onto that sand. Seth was waiting at the far end of the corridor, all four arms drawn in close to his body, his secondary eyes wide in a way I had not seen from him before. He did not speak. He just looked at me with the expression of a being who has just discovered that the universe contains a category of thing he had not previously accounted for. I walked past him toward the medical station. My ribs needed wrapping and my arm needed closing, and I needed to sit down somewhere quiet and drink something warm and stop being interesting for a few hours. Behind me, through the stone walls, I could still hear the crowd. They were still making that sound, slow and building and spreading through the stands. 90,000 beings revising something. I did not know what word the compact had for humans before today. I did not know what word they would reach for tomorrow. But I knew they would find one. They always do, when something walks toward the thing that should have killed it, and simply does not die.